everybody, this is Anne and welcome back to Painting Big. Yes, it's a late start on the month, I'm very sorry, but we're here and we're going to talk about shadows for OSL. We're going to cover some terminology and we're going to talk about color mixes for shadows. We're going to talk about kind of the different ways to do shadows with OSL from easiest to most difficult. All right, let's get to it. Alrighty. So first, some terminology. Let's grab my work in progress Dwarf Barbarian and talk a little bit. I'm not going to go into there's even more shadow terminology that I'm going to be covering here, but I really feel like really just talking about two things today, and that's going to be the form shadow, F-O-R-M, and the core shadow, C-O-R-E. So the form shadow is the shadow cast by the form. It's all of the shadow on the side away from the light source. So any shadow that we paint or see on any of these models, and I've got some David's models, but the shadow side of the model, that is the form shadow. The core shadow is slightly different. I only have a couple models that show core shadow, and the Barbarian is one of them. So when you have a transition between two light sources, and this can be either your main light source and then an ambient light source, like I want a cool ambient light back here, even though it's not done yet, and these two light sources do not overlap. So when you've got a main light source and then say you've got a reflected light source on the back side, or you've got a light source on the front and a light source on the back and they don't overlap, there will be areas that are not touched by either of those light sources. So up here on the side of her face is one of those places. And on the arm. You can see, in fact, pretty much all down the arm and the face. So here, this dark shadow here and here on the neck. Because you can see the main light hitting the hair back here, right? But there's a shadow here. And it's not going to be affected by ambient light, right? Here on the arm, there it is. And you can see it, I've actually sketched it in, see where I've sketched in this band of shadow? That is the core shadow. And the core shadow is the darkest area of shadow between your main light and any reflected light or secondary source. Most of the time, it's going to appear between your main light and your reflected light. And I actually have a painting that shows this really well. So let me whip that out for you. And I already actually have written the PDF for this, guys, and it's a MIDI one. So if you are watching this and you haven't, and you're only on the free level of my Patreon, or you're not on my Patreon at all, consider dropping $2 for the PDF if you really want a reminder and kind of a breakdown on all this. I'll have photos of these models, and I'll be kind of recapping everything I'm talking about here. So, we have a painting of Frida Kahlo, a rather unusual one. You can see the main light source, it's lighting up Frida's face. And then you can see that bright, warm light is hitting the wall, right? And you can see the reflected light, the reflection of the bounce light on the back of her neck. But then look at this area here. See this soft shadow? This is the darkest area of shadow. Right? Across all of this area that is depicted, this is the darkest. And it's right on the edge between where the main light no longer hits and the bounce light no longer hits, right? So that is the core shadow. And it's not as evident here on the cloth, both because he's just sketched in the cloth very roughly down here, and because the cloth is considerably duller as far as sheen. You know, the skin having a sheen enables that bounce light to really show up. So that is what you're dealing with when you're dealing with the core shadow. Why is this important in miniatures? Well, as you can see from Dwarf Barbarian, you can actually use it to get some cool effects. As this model develops, this core shadow will be really, one, you can see that it makes it look very natural. Right here on the skin tone. And down here, I'll have some cool light, reflected light on the back of the arm. So you'll see it very much also on the back of the leg. You can even see the blue there right now. You can see kind of the darker there. So you can do some really cool things with it. It's maybe not as useful in 28, but I did use it on Torch Guy. So here on Torch Guy, we've got kind of just shadow, right? There must be some ambient light because we're seeing a little bit of difference in the tones here. But there isn't much, and I didn't choose a color for it. We've got this bright torch, hitting the shoulder here. Then I've got these glowing crystals. Where you can see the core shadow is right here. This band of shadow right here. Because the light fades out from the crystals before the torch light comes in. So there's this area right under his shoulder where you've got that shadow. And it helps to separate these two areas of light, right? So that's something that actually works very well and is even necessary for the visual effect, I'd say. So we don't get that other places here because I haven't really depicted an ambient and I haven't, not a strong bounce light. So we mostly get it right here. It is, I'd say, a little harder to do on models that are 28, but you can also see it on Sneck even before. I didn't even understand it, guys. At the time I painted Sneck, I just knew that it looked right to keep this shadow between the light areas and the blue reflection that I wanted for the ambient off of the water and stuff. So even then, some part of me understood that between these two things, there should be a shadow. Let's see if you can see it anywhere else. Yeah, you actually can see it on the back. Look at this. We've got the shadow coming right in there. And this is before I even consciously knew and understood what it was. I missed it here. I should have done it. You kind of get a little bit here. I probably should have moved that up or darkened it. And then you can also see it right here. You can see this dark band of shadow between the light and the reflected light, right? So that's pretty cool. So yeah, you can do it on 28s. Yes, you can. And on Sneck, of course, with her single light source, it's quite easy. So given that, let's talk about different ways to depict shadow in OSL. So the easiest way to do it actually isn't going to be Mouseling. The easiest way to do it is mostly I'm going to show you my husband's stuff because he likes to paint this way and I don't. Let me zoom out. All right. So there's a painter in France, or he used to do this anyway, but he was pretty much known for doing a great job on the front of his miniatures and then just pretty much leaving the back black. Like he would prime in black and the back would just be black. And he'd be like, that's in shadow because there's a strong light source and everything else around the figure is dark. And that is probably the easiest way. Some of us consider that phoning it in, but it's valid, guys. It's valid, especially if you're learning how to paint a strong light source, right? And this is David's, by the way. He entitled it Some Old Dead Guy. His title, not mine. But he's doing a very strong light source, and you can see a very strong light source. A very realistic paint job on this one, which is unusual for David. He usually doesn't go for this. So, but when you turn it around, it's all dark. So it's although he's got a little variation here, a little bit, there's almost nothing. The back of the neck is flat. It's in shadow. The brightest stuff is the fact that he did metallics up here, so some of the ambient light is picking up the metallics, right? But it's all flat. So this is the easiest way to start doing like OSL directed lighting, because I kind of count directed lighting like this and like my dwarf, I count that as OSL, even though technically OSL is object source lighting or other source lighting, depending on who you talk to back in the days when they first started talking about this. And there's no object in frame that is lighting him, but there's a very strong directed light source that has strong shadow, right? And David is not putting an ambient in here. Like Torch Guy, this is just a dull ambient. Like, you can definitely see enough to see that the skin tone and the back of the chest plate and the cape are all different colors, right? You can see that. But otherwise, there's not a lot of variation there. He's not putting an ambient light. There's nothing lighting these surfaces back here. This is the easiest way to do it when you start out. And even if if he was holding a torch, it'd be the same thing. You could do the same thing with the back. And then Falcon Girl, who is a cute little girl, she's the same way. Strong light source on the front, very much all in shadow on the back. And although you can see the different, colors are different, there's no directed light, right? You're not seeing any like reflection highlights back here. So then you can contrast that to a model which maybe has a little bit of reflected light, but it's very uniform. So Swifty here is David's Best in Show winning model from ReaperCon a year or two ago. Last year, I think. But she's great. She's got a she's supposed to be in front of a stage at a concert. So she's got a very strong light effect. She's even got a painted in shadow on her neck there. Yes, that's not actually like a real shadow. It's actually painted on because my husband is really good. But when you turn her, what do we have? So here we have some ambient light. So this is the second most difficult thing to do, right? The easiest one is just to paint it dark colors, just like we did. We saw it on Falcon Girl and on Old Dead White Guy. But here, oh, we got a little bit rub off here, but we have some highlights. You can see that the hair has some highlights. It's got some differentiation. We can definitely see it on the denim, right? So what David is telling us with this is that there is bounce light, there's reflected light, but he's also telling us that it's not consistent ambient light. You know why? There's no core shadow. So we can see that the light is really bright, and we can see the shadows come in, but there's so much light coming from everywhere with this bright of a light, you know, there's a lot of bounce. He's chosen to just paint it more or less more with a soft light effect on the back, because he's assuming with a light that bright, it's going to be hitting people behind her, maybe the wall behind her, it's going to be hitting all sorts of things around her. That light is going to be bouncing all over. So he's chosen to like give us a little bit more variance here with Swifty than he did with the other two. Now, I'm showing David's models for this because I actually don't like painting like that. I actually like more of the painting in the round kind of thing where you've got equal highlights and shadows on both sides of the model. So for me, like, it's an interesting exercise, but it drives me a little batty. So I'm more preferring lately, if I'm going to do that, I want a strong ambient source where I can actually highlight and shade things on the back of the model, like with Mouseling. So Mouseling is a good example of this. Let's get close with Mouseling. Okay, so we have a bright, warm light source on the front. And then when we turn him around, you can see the shadow side, right? And you can see that it's cool, right? But there is light back here. You can see that I've highlighted and shaded the cape away from the light source. You can see that I have highlighted and shaded most things, as a matter of fact. The fur has a cool ambient. You can see the blue of the light on the NMM and his tail, which is very grayed out, as opposed to the peachy skin up here on the ear, where you can see the real color of that. I've washed it all out, but it's a blue ambient light. And the reason this works, the reason the cool ambient works, and I'm going to give the why it works a couple times in the PDF, but the reason this works and the reason our brain accepts it is that we're used to seeing cool shadows in nature. We're used to, especially under a blue sky, if you are in a parking lot and you're under, say it's a sunny day, blue sky, you're walking across, you look at a car and you look at the white striping next to that car, you're going to see that it's actually blue. And that's essentially the reflection of the skylight, not the sunlight, because it's in the shadow, but that blue sky is throwing blue light down there. So you've got a blue ambient. That's a very specific example, but you'll also see it in winter scenes when people do landscapes. Most of them will use like an indigo or an ultramarine shadow, or mixture in their, when they're doing tree shadows on snow and things like that. We're used to seeing it depicted in both art and nature. So that's why the cool ambient light works, because we expect it. And here, these are two very different cool ambients. I'm going much darker with the Mouseling, right? I'm going much lighter so far with her. But it's the same kind of thing, and that's why it works. So I want to talk a little bit next about color mixing for shadows. And the easiest way, obviously, is to do what David's doing here. Use a darker blue. I think he's also mixing a little brown in here. You can kind of see it, yeah. So you can, of course, just default to using a darker version of the color. You could use a dark red instead of the bright red, and you'd be pretty good. But if you're going to mix colors in, there are a couple ways to do it. And most of the time, what people will tell you to do is complementary color. Another way, like David did on this guy, is to use, you can see how he's mixing some browns in. So he's mixed some dark browns. He's not only using them in the shadows here, but he's also probably mixed them into his blues. So I often say you can mix brown liner into colors to create a realistic shadow color. Or you could do blue liner and go with that blue cool shadow, right? But there are a couple other things you can do either in combination or you can kind of replace with that. So in combination, you can mix a bit of your basing color into the model. And I don't have a great example of this one. But suffice to say that actually Frida's a really good example. So let's bring her up again. So here we can clearly see where the color of the wall has been mixed into the skin color. And yes, she's supposed to be that pale and ghastly. Sorry. She was actually painted kind of to be robotic, like kind of like androidish. So that's why the weird color scheme. But you can see that the basing color, in this case, that's the only ground color you can see, is being mixed into the shadows. In nature, the way that light works is that light is going to be bouncing off of objects in the environment, and it is going to pick up some of the color of those objects. So if you're wearing a yellow shirt and you like lay down on the lawn and you have somebody take a picture of you, or look at you, if you look at somebody lying down with a yellow shirt, you're going to see green in the shadows of that shirt. Absolutely. And it's because the sun is beaming down onto the grass and it's reflecting up. So we're always going to get a little bit of that. Most of the time on a 28 millimeter, I think that'd be a pretty subtle effect. But when you're dealing with a bigger model, brighter light source, or if you're dealing with metals, obviously you can do this. You're supposed to do it with reflected light. But yeah, so you can mix a little bit of your base into there, and it will be absolutely proper as per physics. That's what David likes to rail on about, anyway. If I had an example, I'd show you. Maybe I can dig one up for the PDF. All right, the next one is actually the one I used for Mouseling, and that's the portraiture painter's approach. So I like this approach not because it's like real, like I can't give you a why it works. But I like it because it has set rules. So when I talk about mixing basing color in to, create shadows and stuff, I kind of am just like, you're going to have to feel your way. And that isn't really useful for people who, when you're learning, you need something defined to follow, right? So if you are that person who needs a rule set to follow, you can start mixing shadows by following the portraiture rules. So there are 2 rules. You first start with your base color. So in this case, the Mouseling was this meadow green, right? And then first you mix in your complementary color to create shadows, right? We just talked about that. That's one of the basic art ways that people tell you to create a shadow. So in this case, I believe I mixed a tiny bit of Asmodeus red into the green to dull it, and it went a little gray. But rule number 2 is actually to look at your light source color, which in this case is a yellow-orange, and to choose the complement of that. So not only the complement of your main color, but the complement of your light source. In that case, a yellow-orange is going to be a violet-blue, right? Yellow to purple and orange to blue. So a violet-blue or an indigo. So I grabbed Twilight Indigo and I mixed that into the green. And that's that bluish cast that you're seeing, that cool cast. That's what you're seeing there. And once I had those 2 colors, I knew that the indigo was going to be mixed into everything, right? So when you see this color, this blue color that the reflected light is picking up, that's that indigo plus white. On the tail down here, I had to mix in a little bit of green because it was pink, right? And then I had to mix in that indigo. So it grayed it out a lot, and then it made it a little bit cooler. So that is something that you can do, those 2 rules. First, choose the complementary color of the object that you're painting, and then choose the complementary color of the light. And of course, the complementary color of the light is going to get mixed into every shadow you do. So you can just keep that around, and you don't have to worry about choosing a new one for every single area of your model for that, right? You just have to worry about it as you're shifting colors across the mini. But that's something you can work with and try out. And then when I was highlighting, I was really just adding white to that. White or an off-white. You could use a blue off-white, like ghost white, if you wanted to. That would work if you're embracing the cool ambient like I do. But yeah, then I'm just taking that muted color I've mixed and adding white to bring up these little highlights from the ambient light. And then it works like that. Okay, so one of the most difficult things, we're almost done. 2 different light sources hitting 2 different areas of the model. And the most difficult thing about this is the fact that not only do you have to worry about how your colors up here are reacting to the torchlight, but now you have to worry about how these colors are going to react to the magenta light here, and you have to remember it's going to fall off, and you have to think about core shadows and all the rest of it. So this is where it gets interesting. I think the most shocking or crazy use of this I saw was somebody painting an urban fantasy bust, and they had chosen like a regular light on one side of the bust and a neon light of a totally different color on the other. I can't remember if it was red and yellow or red, yellow and green or what, but it was driving him to conniptions. He was having a major breakdown when he was trying to paint it, just because it was so difficult to do. So this is the not easy mode. And then there is one thing that is even harder than this, and that would be if I had introduced an ambient light down here, and I kind of did. You guys can see that the colors are different down here, but it's very much an ambient light. Like it's not really an ambient, right? It's like what David did on the back of a Falcon Girl, right? You can see that there's enough light so that you can see differences in the surfaces, and a little bit of ambient is getting picked up down here. But that's really, if I had gone any stronger than that, it would have been pretty hellish to do. Because then I would have to figure out, again, what color is my ambient light, and, how is it hitting everything, and yeah. So that is the hardcore. That's the hardest mode. And there is where the art comes in, guys. There is where I can't really give you a lot of rules. It's where you have to really just get into the light and up to your elbows and just get your hands dirty and practice and try things, and study other people's artwork and study other people's miniatures and figure it out, right? It's what I have to do every time I paint an OSL figure. I have to refigure out. I have to apply all the rules I know, and then I have to use my gut and look at examples and talk to David and do, there comes a point where it really is just kind of you forging your own path with the mini. And that's the fun part, right? It can also be the frustrating part, which is why I do these videos, to try to protect you, try to give you a helping hand in the face of frustration, because frustration is the hobby killer, and I want all of you guys to love the hobby. So anyway, there we are. There's our different OSL shadow things going on. I hope you enjoyed the video. We are going to go into direct practice next time. I have a dwarf bust that's smaller, and I think because he's so simple, I think I might choose him to do some examples. I might try to pick up something else as well, like a simple, like a Reaper model or a Dark Sword or something, to do some stuff in practice, right? So that you guys can get a look at how I'm making decisions throughout the actual process of painting a figure. All right. So I'm going to leave you there, and I hope that this was useful. And, well, geez, this is quite the video for a freebie. I hope you had fun. And I hope you come over and look at the Patreon and take a look at that $2 PDF as well, okay? Have a great one. This is Anne signing off.